Hello again, friends. This is Jim Ransom with another edition of Morning Jim. This will be our last poetry reading for July, and it is happening on an extremely beautiful day here, with the temp in the 70s and a light breeze in western Pennsylvania. I hope you all have some decent listening weather where you are, although that could mean bad weather. Some people enjoy listening more when they're snuggled safely indoors and the storm is raging outside. Whatever, still nice to have you with us. I'm reading some poetry from the time of what our friends in the UK called the Great War, and what we call World War I, the precursor, as it turned out, to World War II. Don't we ever learn? Of course, since then, America and Great Britain have been involved in what seems like endless warfare someplace in the world, because I don't think our countries are very inclined to fight. But when somebody kicks you in the teeth and attacks you, you must either roll over and let them stomp you to death, or you have to fight back. Many poets and poems were spawned by the Great War. There were many more than resulted from World War II. I guess by that time everyone wanted to get on with life and not be reminded of the death and travesties of warfare. The Great War was a particularly bloody affair. There were 10 million soldiers and sailors killed in that war. And in Britain, for example, the middle class and the young of the upper classes were devastated. We are fortunate that in Kansas City, Kansas, there's a great museum with World War I memorabilia located. It's called the World War I Museum. What else would we expect? But it is a beautifully done museum of that war, and it is worth more than one trip if you haven't seen it. There were poets from all the countries that were involved in the war, of course. A much larger group were from Britain than anywhere else. But we had some poets, such as the American Alan Seeger, himself an uncurable romantic, who joined the French Foreign Legion early in the war and was killed before America even entered the war. And his poetry about the war was published and was quite popular, although later critics suggested that if he could have only survived, he would have turned into a much better and different poet than he was during the war. The best and grittiest poems from the war were by the British, in my opinion. They range from the beautiful but rather romantic In Flanders Fields by John McCrae to the poems of Wilfred, Owen, and Siegfried Sassoon. I'm going to start us out with In Flanders Fields. Many of you have heard that before, I'm sure. And it's by John McCrae. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders field. That poem took the public by storm, but there were much grittier poems to come, such as this one by Wilfred Owen, who wrote the Anthem for Doomed Youth. What passing bells for these who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells, and bugles calling for them from sad shires. What candles may be held to speed them all? Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall, their flowers, the tenderness of patient minds, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds. Wilfred Owen was one of the most admired poets of World War I. He entered in 1915, and his poetry was being published as the war went on. He was killed in France on November 4th, 1918. That's a rather important date to think about, and a very ironic date. Think about it this way. The armistice came on November 11th, 1918. So only a week he had to live if he could have done so, and he would have been through the horror of this war. In the UK, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month is remembered wherever you are standing, if you're shopping or in church. At that moment, everything stops, and World War I is memorialized. It's a very moving experience. I've had it. I've gone through it at least twice, maybe more. I can't remember for sure. Okay, that's the Anthem for Doomed Youth. Now we're going to move on to a poem by a poet that most of you didn't know was a poet, and that's Ernest Hemingway. It's called the Champ d'Honneur, which means fields of honor. Soldiers never do die well. Crosses marked the places, wooden crosses where they fell, stuck above their faces. Soldiers pitch and cough and twitch. All the world roars red and black. Soldiers smother in a ditch, choking through the whole attack. Ernest Hemingway was just a young man during World War I, and he volunteered to drive an ambulance for the Italian army. He was severely wounded during that war. I would like to read a commentary about Ernest Hemingway and his later career as a writer that appeared on the website of the Poetry Foundation. This section is by John W. Aldridge. Hemingway became a legendary figure, a kind of 20th century Lord Byron, and like Byron, he had learned to play himself, his own best hero, with superb conviction. He was Hemingway of the rugged outdoor grin and the hairy chest, posing, crouching in the African bush with elephant gun at the ready. Or beside a marlin he had just landed, or a lion he had just shot. He was Tarzan Hemingway, Bwana Hemingway, commanding his native bears in terse Swahili. He was war correspondent Hemingway, writing a play in the Hotel Florida in Madrid, while 30 fascist shells crashed through the roof. Later on, he was Task Force Hemingway, swathed in ammunition belts and defending his post single-handed against fierce German attacks. Anthony Burgess declared, reconciling literature and action, he fulfilled for all writers the sick-room dream of leaving the desk for the arena and then returning to the desk. He wrote good and lived good, and both activities were the same. The pen handled with the accuracy of the rifle, sweat and dignity, bags of cojones. That's a good picture of Hemingway, I think. And most of us have never thought of him as a poet, but in his post-World War I days, he did write some poems. Most of them were not very good, actually. And the one I read you was very typical of what they were like. Well, finally, we don't ordinarily think of Edna St. Vincent Millay as a great war poet. But in fact, she had an affair with an American officer before he went off to war. And she wrote a sonnet that qualifies as a woman's response to the war. It's Sonnet 19, What Lips My Lips Have Kissed. What lips my lips have kissed, and where, and why, I have forgotten. And what arms have lain under my head till morning, but the rain is full of ghosts tonight, that tap and sigh upon the glass and listen for reply. And in my heart there stirs a quiet pain for unremembered lads that not again will turn to me at midnight with a cry. Thus in the winter stands the lonely tree, nor knows what birds have vanished one by one, yet knows its boughs more silent than before. I cannot say what loves have come and gone. I only know what summer sang in me a little while, that in me sings no more. I think that is a beautiful poem, and I'm sure that there were many women during and after World War I that could have spoken this poem if they could have gotten through it, who had lost their beloved husbands and sons or lovers or boyfriends, who knows what men vanished from their lives. And don't you just love the metaphor in the last stanza where she says, thus in the winter stands the lonely tree, nor knows what birds have vanished one by one. Think of that, the lonely tree doesn't know what birds come and go, but it does know that its boughs are more silent than before. And that is a metaphor for the terrible toll of World War I, where 10 million soldiers were killed or died of disease, and 7 million civilians died as well, in Belgium and France in particular, and no doubt some in Germany as well. Okay, that's it for this reading. And I will have to tell you that I've only touched on the poetry of war in the time of the Great War. And it's time to stop for today. I may return to World War I again next week, but I'm not certain of that. My poetic thoughts change frequently. And I am certain of one thing, and that is I want to select some poems that will be meaningful and useful and attractive to all of you. And it's also certain that I'll be back then in 1 week with more poetry. Goodbye and good luck to all.